Before I share my story, let me ask you, what would you do if the man who left you with nothing came back, desperate for help, never realizing you, built a new life right under his nose? I thought I was starting over from scratch, selling flowers on the street just to get by. But the day my ex-husband begged me for money, I realized I'd spent years letting him underestimate me. This isn't just a story about pride or revenge. It's about the moment you decide to stop shrinking for someone else's comfort and the quiet power of building something for yourself, even if no one else sees it coming. So settle in, and if you've ever wondered what you'd do in my shoes, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next changed not just my life, but the way I see myself forever. The day my ex-husband begged me for money while I sold flowers on the street, I realized I'd spent my whole life letting him believe I was less than I am. It started with a bouquet. Not the kind you get on Valentine's Day, but the kind you buy for yourself on a Tuesday, just to remember what hope smells like. I'd been selling flowers on the corner of Main and 7th for almost a year, rain or shine, wind or snow, my hands red and raw from the cold, my heart stubbornly beating on. After the divorce, I'd lost almost everything. The house, the car, the savings account I'd built up over 20 years of marriage. My ex-husband, Paul, had been charming in court, all apologies and crocodile tears. But when the dust settled, he walked away with the life we'd built and left me with the bills. I moved into a tiny apartment above a bakery, started working nights cleaning offices, and spent my days selling flowers from a cart I'd bought with the last of my savings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I liked the work, the smell of fresh roses, the way people's faces lit up when I handed them a bouquet, the small kindnesses exchanged between strangers. I liked the rhythm of the street, the way the city woke up around me, the way the sun warmed the pavement by noon. I told myself I was starting over, that I didn't need anyone, that I could build a new life from the ground up. But some days, the loneliness crept in, sharp and cold. I missed the comfort of routine, the sound of someone else's voice in the morning, the feeling of being seen. My daughter, Grace, was my anchor. She was in college now, studying to be a nurse, her days full of classes and clinicals and late-night study sessions. She called every evening, her voice bright, her laughter a balm to my weary heart. "Mom, you're amazing," she'd say. "You're the strongest person I know." I'd smile even when my hands ached, even when my feet were sore, even when the world felt too heavy. "I'm just doing what I have to, sweetheart. That's what mothers do." The building where I sold flowers was old, its brick facade worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. It had once been a department store, then a bakery, then a string of failed businesses. Now it housed a cafe, a bookstore, and a handful of small shops. The owner was a mystery, someone who kept to themselves, who sent a manager to collect the rent, who never raised the price on my little corner. I liked it that way. I liked the anonymity, the freedom, the sense that I was building something for myself, even if no one else noticed. One chilly morning in early spring, I was setting up my cart when I saw him, Paul, my ex-husband, walking down the street, his shoulders hunched, his coat too thin for the weather. He looked older, thinner, the swagger gone from his step. He didn't see me at first. He was too busy scanning the street, his eyes darting from shop to shop, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. When he finally looked my way, his face went pale. "Anna," he said, his voice uncertain. I smiled, my heart pounding. "Hello, Paul." He hesitated, then stepped closer, his eyes flicking over the cart, the flowers, the faded sign with my name on it. "I didn't know you were here," he said, his voice trailing off. I shrugged, arranging a bouquet of tulips. "I've been here for a while, it's honest work." He nodded, his eyes full of something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or shame. We stood in silence for a moment, the city moving around us, the air thick with things unsaid. Then he cleared his throat, his voice low. "Anna, I need your help, I'm in trouble." I looked at him, at the man I'd once loved, at the man who'd left me with nothing. And I realized then that I was stronger than I'd ever been. Paul stood there, shifting from foot to foot, his hands jammed deep in his pockets. For a moment, I saw the man I'd married, The one who used to bring me wildflowers from the side of the road, who'd make me laugh until I cried, who'd promised me the world. But that man was long gone, replaced by someone smaller, someone worn down by his own choices. He looked at the flowers at the cart, at the faded sign with my name painted in careful script. "You really do this every day?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, arranging a bouquet of daffodils. "Every day, rain or shine." He looked away, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry, Anna. I never thought things would end up like this." I shrugged, my hands steady. "Neither did I, but here we are." He hesitated, then leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I lost my job, Anna. The company went under. I've been looking for work, but no one's hearing. I'm behind on rent. I don't know what to do." I looked at him, at the lines etched deep into his face, at the desperation in his eyes. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, a memory of the man I once loved. But then I remembered the court dates, the empty bank account, the way he'd walked away without a backward glance. "I'm sorry, Paul," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I wish I could help, but I barely make enough to get by myself." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. I didn't know where else to go." He turned to leave, but then stopped, his shoulders slumping. "Do you think you could spare a few dollars? Just enough for a meal?" I reached into my pocket, pulling out a $5 bill. I handed it to him, my hands steady, my heart strangely calm. "Take care of yourself, Paul," I said. "That's all any of us can do." He took the money, his eyes shining with tears. "Thank you, Anna. I'm sorry for everything." I nodded, watching as he walked away, his steps slow, his head bowed. After he left, I stood at my cart, the city moving around me, the air thick with memories. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the dreams we'd shared, the life we'd built and lost. I thought about the woman I'd become, the woman who could stand on her own, who could build something from nothing, who could look her ex-husband in the eye and feel nothing but peace. I realized then that I was stronger than I'd ever known. That evening, I closed up the cart, my hands aching from the cold, my heart full of a strange, quiet pride. I walked up the steps to my apartment, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery below, the sound of laughter and music spilling out into the street. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. I thought about Grace, about the life she was building, about the future I was still learning to believe in. I realized then that sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is let go of the past. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is choosing yourself. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window and the distant rumble of delivery trucks on the street below. I made myself a cup of coffee, wrapped myself in Tom's old sweater, and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. I thought about Paul, about the way he'd looked at me, lost, desperate, ashamed. I wondered where he'd spent the night, if he'd found a place to stay, if he'd eaten the meal my $5 had bought. I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on my own life, my own dreams, my own small victories. I opened the shop early, arranging the flowers in neat rows, the scent of roses and lilies filling the air. I greeted my regulars with a smile, listened to their stories, shared in their joys and sorrows. But Paul lingered in the back of my mind, a shadow I couldn't quite shake. That afternoon, as I was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the shop, I noticed a man standing across the street, watching me. He was tall, with a worn coat and a battered hat pulled low over his eyes. For a moment, I thought it was Paul, come back to ask for more money, to beg for another chance. But when he crossed the street and approached my cart, I realized he was a stranger. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice rough but polite. "Are you the owner of this shop?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" He smiled, his eyes kind. "I just wanted to say thank you. My wife bought flowers from you last week and they made her day. She's been sick and it's been hard, but your kindness meant a lot." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Thank you for telling me. That means more than you know." He tipped his hat, his smile warm. "You're doing good work here. Don't let anyone tell you different." After he left, I stood at the cart, the rain falling softly around me, the city moving on. I thought about the small ways we touch each other's lives, the kindnesses that ripple out, the hope that grows in unexpected places. I realized then that I was building something, even if no one else could see it. That evening, as I closed up the shop, I noticed a familiar figure standing in the alley. Paul. He looked worse than before, his coat soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes hollow. "Anna," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry to bother you again. I don't know where else to go." I hesitated, my heart aching. "What do you need, Paul?" He looked down, shame coloring his cheeks. "A place to stay, just for a night. I'll sleep on the floor, I won't be any trouble." I thought about the years we'd spent together, the promises we'd made, the pain we'd caused each other. I thought about Grace, about the example I wanted to set, about the boundaries I needed to keep. "I'm sorry, Paul," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I can't help you, not like this." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I understand, I'm sorry." He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, his steps slow. I watched him go, my heart heavy but resolute. I realized then that sometimes the hardest thing you can do is say no. And sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing yourself. The next week, the city seemed to bloom. The rain gave way to sunshine, and the sidewalks filled with people, couples holding hands, children skipping rope, office workers hurrying by with coffee in hand. My flower cart became a little oasis on the corner, a place where people paused to breathe, to smile, to remember that beauty still existed in the world. I started to notice new faces among my regulars. A young woman who bought a single rose every Friday, a man who always asked for sunflowers, a little boy who pressed his nose to the glass and pointed at the daisies. I learned their names, their stories, their favorite flowers. I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't known in years. But Paul was never far from my mind. I saw him sometimes wandering the streets, his coat growing shabbier, his face more drawn. He never approached me again, but I caught him watching from a distance, his eyes full of longing and regret. One afternoon, as I was arranging a bouquet of tulips, the building manager stopped by. Mr. Lee was a quiet man, always dressed in a crisp suit, his hair perfectly combed. He greeted me with a nod, his eyes kind. "Anna, I wanted to thank you for the way you've taken care of the storefront. The tenants love having you here. The building feels brighter." I smiled, warmth blooming in my chest. "Thank you, Mr. Lee. That means a lot." He hesitated, then said, "The owner asked me to pass along a message. They're grateful for your hard work. They want you to know that as long as you want this spot, it's yours. No rent increase, no changes." I blinked, surprised. "That's very generous. Please thank them for me." He nodded, his smile mysterious. "I will." That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air. I thought about the building, about the owner I'd never met, about the kindness that had allowed me to rebuild my life. I wondered who they were, what their story was, why they'd chosen to help me. I felt a sense of gratitude, of hope, of possibility. A few days later, Grace called, her voice bright. "Mom, I got the internship. I'll be working at the hospital this summer. I'm so proud of you, Mom. You've shown me what it means to be strong." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. You're my greatest joy." That weekend, the city held a street fair. I decorated my cart with ribbons and balloons, filled it with the brightest flowers I could find. People stopped to admire the display, to buy bouquets, to share stories and laughter. As the sun set, I looked around at the crowd, at the life I'd built, at the community I'd found. I realized then that I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. But Paul's shadow still lingered. I knew he was struggling, that he was lost, that he needed help. I wondered if I should reach out, if I should offer him a second chance, if I should let him back into my life. I thought about the building, about the owner's kindness, about the power of starting over. And I promised myself that, whatever happened next, I would not let myself be erased. The following week, the city was alive with the promise of summer. The days grew longer, the air warmer. and the flower cart became a gathering place for neighbors and strangers alike. I found myself smiling more, laughing more, feeling lighter than I had in years. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was finally free from the shadow of my past. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you think you've outrun it. One afternoon, as I was arranging a bouquet of lilies for a regular customer, I saw Paul standing across the street. He looked thinner, older, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. He watched me for a long moment, then crossed the street, his steps hesitant. "Anna," he said, his voice rough, "can we talk?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. "What do you want, Paul?" He looked down, shame coloring his cheeks. "I'm sorry for the way things ended. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I lost everything, Anna. The house, the job, the friends. I have nowhere else to go." I felt a surge of anger, of pity, of something I couldn't quite name. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the dreams we'd shared, the pain we'd caused each other. "I can't help you, Paul," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I've built a new life. I can't go back." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I understand. I needed to see you. I needed to know you were okay." I looked at him, at the man I'd once loved, at the man who'd left me with nothing. I realized then that I no longer needed his approval, his forgiveness, his love. I was enough. That night I sat in my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air. I thought about Paul, about the life we'd built and lost, about the woman I'd become. I realized then that sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is let go of the past. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is choosing yourself. A few days later, Mr. Lee stopped by the cart, his smile warm. "The owner wanted me to give you this," he said, handing me a small envelope. Inside was a note, written in careful script. "Thank you for bringing beauty to this corner of the world. You remind us all that hope can bloom in the most unlikely places." I felt tears prick my eyes, gratitude swelling in my chest. That weekend, Grace came home for a visit. We spent the afternoon in the garden, planting new roses, laughing about old memories, dreaming about the future. "Mom, you're amazing," she said, hugging me tight. "You've built something beautiful." I hugged her back, my heart full. "So have you, sweetheart, so have you." The days after Grace's visit were filled with a new kind of hope. She called every evening, her voice bright, her laughter a balm to my heart. She told me about her classes, her friends, her dreams for the future. I listened, proud and grateful, knowing that I'd given her the strength to chase her own happiness. But Paul's shadow still lingered. I saw him sometimes, wandering the streets, his shoulders hunched, his eyes hollow. He never approached me again, but I could feel his presence, a reminder of the life I'd left behind. One afternoon, as I was closing up the cart, Mr. Lee stopped by with a smile. "Anna, the owner, would like to meet you," he said, his eyes twinkling. "He's heard so much about you." I felt a flutter of nerves, a mix of excitement and fear. I wondered who the owner was, what he wanted, why he'd chosen to help me. We arranged to meet the next day, in the cafe next to the flower shop. I arrived early, my hands trembling, my heart pounding. The owner was a woman, elegant, poised, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She introduced herself as Mrs. Chen, a long-time resident of the city, a lover of flowers and stories. "I've watched you for months, Anna," she said, her voice gentle. "I've seen the way you care for your customers, the way you bring beauty to this corner of the world. I wanted to help you, to give you a chance to build something for yourself." I felt tears prick my eyes, gratitude swelling in my chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. You've given me more than you know." She smiled, her eyes shining. "You did the work, Anna. You built this life. I just gave you a place to do it." That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air. I thought about Mrs. Chen, about the kindness of strangers, about the power of starting over. I realized then that sometimes, the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is accepting help when you need it most. After meeting Mrs. Chen, something inside me shifted. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years, not just as a woman selling flowers on a street corner, but as someone who mattered, someone who had built something beautiful out of heartbreak. Her words echoed in my mind as I walked home that evening, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, the air cool and sweet. I thought about all the people who had helped me along the way. Ruth, Grace, Mr. Lee, Mrs. Chen, even the customers who stopped by for a single rose or a kind word. I realized that I wasn't alone, that I was part of a community, a web of kindness and connection that stretched farther than I'd ever imagined. But Paul's shadow still lingered. I saw him one last time, sitting on a bench in the park, his head in his hands, his coat pulled tight against the wind. I hesitated, then sat beside him, the silence between us heavy with things unsaid. He looked up, his eyes red, his face drawn. "I'm sorry, Anna, for everything. For leaving you, for taking everything, for not seeing what I had until it was gone." I nodded, my heart aching. "I forgave you a long time ago, Paul, but I had to forgive myself first." He smiled, a sad, tired smile. "You're stronger than I ever was." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We all have to find our own strength, Paul. I hope you find yours." We sat in silence for a while, watching the city move around us, the world full of possibility and pain. When I stood to leave, he hugged me, his arms trembling. "Thank you, Anna, for everything." I hugged him back, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. "Take care of yourself, Paul." That night, I walked home through the city, the scent of flowers lingering in the air, the sound of laughter and music drifting from open windows. I felt a sense of peace, of closure, of hope. I realized then that sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is let go of the past. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is choosing yourself. The next morning, I opened the shop early, the sun just beginning to rise over the city. I arranged the flowers in neat rows, the colors bright and bold, the scent filling the air. I greeted my regulars with a smile, listened to their stories, shared in their joys and sorrows. Grace called, her voice full of excitement. "Mom, I got the job. I'm going to be working at the hospital full-time." I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You're going to do amazing things." She laughed, her voice warm. "I learned from the best, Mom." As the day wore on, I watched the city move around me, the world full of possibility and promise. I realized then that I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. And I promised myself that, whatever happened next, I would never let myself be erased. Summer melted into autumn, and the city changed with the seasons. The trees along Main Street turned gold and crimson, and the air grew crisp. My flower cart became a beacon of color on gray mornings, a place where people came for a little beauty, a little hope, a little reminder that life could still surprise them. I found myself looking forward to each day, to the rhythm of arranging bouquets, to the small kindnesses exchanged with strangers. I started leaving a single flower on the bench outside the shop every morning, a gift for whoever needed it most. Sometimes it was gone before I finished setting up. Sometimes it stayed until dusk, a quiet promise that someone was thinking of someone else. Grace visited often, her laughter filling my apartment, her stories brightening even the darkest days. She brought friends from the hospital, young women and men full of dreams and worries, and we'd sit around the kitchen table, sharing meals and memories. I realized that my home was full again, not with the family I'd lost, but with the family I'd found. Ruth was never far away. She came by every Sunday, bringing fresh bread and the news from her corner of the world. We'd sit on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker on, talking about the past and the future, about the ways we'd both changed. One afternoon, Mrs. Chen stopped by the cart, her eyes twinkling. "Anna, I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice warm. "You've made this corner of the city a better place. You've given people hope." I smiled, feeling a quiet pride. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I couldn't have done it without you." She shook her head, her eyes shining. "You did the work, Anna. You built this life. I just gave you a place to do it." That evening, as I closed up the cart, I saw a young couple standing nearby, arguing quietly. The woman was crying, her hands clenched at her sides. I walked over, offering her a single rose. "Sometimes, a little kindness is all we need," I said, my voice gentle. She smiled through her tears, taking the flower, her eyes full of gratitude. I watched them walk away, their hands entwined, the rose bright against the fading light. As I walked home, the city felt different, softer, kinder, more full of possibility. I realized then that I was no longer just surviving, I was living. I was no longer just getting by, I was thriving. And I promised myself that, whatever happened next, I would never let myself be erased. Sometimes, the people who walk away from us are the ones who teach us how to stand on our own. I never imagined that the man who left me with nothing would one day come back, asking for help, never realizing I built a new life right under his nose. But life has a way of showing us that our worth isn't measured by what we lose, but by what we choose to build, day by day, with our own two hands. If you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever had to start over when the world thought you were finished, I hope you know you're not alone. I know what it's like to sit in the quiet after everyone's gone, to wonder if you did enough, if you loved enough, if you mattered enough. I know what it's like to feel the ache of old wounds and the hope of new beginnings, to want to hold on and let go at the same time. But I also know that healing is possible. That courage is a choice you make every day, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in ways that change everything. I know that you can lose everything and still find yourself again, that you can be broken and still be whole, that you can be pushed out and still come back stronger. Would you have given your ex-husband money, or would you have let him see the life you built without him? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story, because sometimes sharing our pain is the first step toward healing. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for listening and for being part of this family. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, even after the deepest heartbreak, you can still choose to begin again. And if you want to see what happens when a woman finally chooses herself, or if you believe in the power of second chances, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the next story might just be the one you need.